Everybody. We're just about to start Plenary 4, and I'm delighted to welcome onto the stage today Dr. Rowena Arshad, who is the head of Moray House School of Education in Edinburgh. At the end, I have Anuradha Das Mathur, who's the founder and director of 9.9 Media in India. And on my right, I have Professor Dwi Aristina Pulubuhu, who's the rector at Universitas Hasanuddin in Indonesia. And Professor Pulubuhu was the first female vice-rector, I believe, in her university after 85 years. And it's quite relevant to the discussion that we're having now. Professor Pulubuhu is one of only 4 female rectors across the university sector in Indonesia. That's 4 out of 125 state universities. The subject of the plenary is ivory towers and glass ceilings. And I wanted to start with a little bit of good news, which is that in 80% of countries around the world, we've seen an increase in women managers and women in positions of seniority in education since 2000. So we could say that the trends are positive. However, to take a line from Jane Harman, often when women break through a glass ceiling, what they find is another layer of men above it. And I think that these positive statistics mask the fact that still there are only 3 countries in the world, according to the ILO, where across all sectors you're more likely to be managed by a woman than by a man. And these 3 countries are Jamaica, where across all sectors 60% of managers and owners of businesses are women, Colombia, which has 53%, and St. Lucia, which has 52%. The UK does slightly worse. The UK is ranked 49th in the world with only 34% of women managers. And in the region here, we have Sri Lanka ranked 63rd with 28%, Iran ranked 90th out of 108 with about 15%, Bangladesh 105th out of 108, and Pakistan 107th out of 108 with less than 3% of owners of businesses or managers being women. On boards, we see that worldwide less than 30% of board members are women. And yesterday we heard from a number of people about the gender statistics in the world's biggest companies, where less than 5% of CEOs are women. The text that we have to start us off here seems to indicate that the positive statistics or the positive trends that we see in other sectors are perhaps not matched in academia, and it seems to suggest that academia is worse. And I want to start by saying, first of all, is gender disparity in academia worse than other sectors? And what is it specifically about academia that leads to these problems with glass ceilings? And Rowena, I'd like to start with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Danny. I think if you look at FTSE 100 companies, actually at board levels, they are catching up and some are overtaking. So some of the big names like Agreco, GlaxoSmith, Klein, HSBC are topping over 30–35%. If you look across to higher education in the UK, we're about level pegging at about 30%. But I think the thing that interests me most is that the universities that have a gender balance on their boards are more likely to appoint female vice-chancellors. So there's something there that is happening about gender balance boards. And I think that throws into some question the issue of quotas, which had a lot of reaction in the morning session. I was somebody who wasn't very keen on quotas. I am now moving my position on that to thinking perhaps that is something we have to look at, and perhaps for different levels. Maybe for something like governance groups, we do actually have to start imposing some form of targets, but possibly harder than targets, quotas, because if the evidence is showing us that where there is gender balance, change is occurring, then we have to look at that quite seriously. What, however, is unfortunate is within the universities, where there's gender balance, it's 3 times more likely that there will be female VCs, but they tend to be in the newer universities, not in the older ones. So, you know, the ancients, like my own university. So I think that's the first thing that is useful and interesting to think about. I do think change does affect other change. So when I took over as the Dean of Education for the school, Murray House School of Education, I was the first minority ethnic, visible minority ethnic woman to have taken over in Scottish education. What I noticed as I took over is the profile of the doctoral students that are heading our way in terms of people wanting to study the kinds of areas that I'm studying in and that I can supervise in. So actually, the numbers of students coming in to do doctoral studentships and take up studies on things like race and equality issues has actually gone up. So there's something there where I think if you have role models, if you have people positioned in top situations, other people start following and come through. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think that I wanted to look at was something that's been mentioned again and again by other people, and also in my previous session this morning in the panel. It's time to actually concentrate on looking at institutions and men and not women. I'm not saying that mentoring is not important. I'm not saying that networking is not important. But actually, if you're wanting to stop sticky floors and glass ceilings, you actually have to look at the people who are the power holders and to bring them into the discussion and the debate. And a lot of the voices we've heard, and perhaps deliberately so over the last 2 days in this room, has been by women. But actually, we know where our problems are. As somebody said in the session, colleagues from Iran were saying, we actually know where the glass ceilings are. What we need are other people now to come in and help with the smashing of those glass ceilings. So one of the ways that I've seen it happen more so in industry has been actually some of them when I was Equal Opportunities Commissioner for the UK, but with responsibility for Scotland, one of the ways we appealed to businesses to start taking over and taking issue of this was the CEOs, men who had daughters, and to say to them, do you want your daughters to have unequal pay? Because that is what is happening. And of course the answer for most of the fathers is no, I don't want that. So that's where the change has started. The other thing that I've actually also seen in my time in terms of the comparison between HE and business has been a lot of the women in business have actually also hit glass ceilings and have gone on to actually start their own businesses up, actually become sole traders and become CEOs for themselves. I do think that the change that's required in higher education, where it's been led, I think more sophisticated questions. Some of them are quite obvious things you can do. Again, it was mentioned yesterday about recruitment panels. This is something that's not new. I remembered a colleague of mine who left Edinburgh University many years ago and became Vice Chancellor of Bradford University and then Stirling University, but unfortunately is now no longer with us, was a man called Colin Bell. And I first met Colin in the early 2000s. And Colin, when he took over as VC of Bradford, he said immediately, if there's no gender balance on the recruitment panels within the university for positions, scrap it. It didn't take long, because he did actually cancel very senior panels, and it didn't take long for that message to trickle down and for the culture of that university in terms of recruitment to change. In my own university, I remember when we merged with the University of Edinburgh in 1998. At that time, the senior vice principal there was a man called Mike Henderson. And Mike asked me into the room and said to me, how are we inadvertently, unconsciously discriminating against women or minorities within the university? And we looked at the issue of publications, and that actually came up again in the previous morning's session about women and not in the STEM areas, etc. But actually, perhaps we looked at publications and the citations and wondered whether there were certain publications that were rated a lot higher and that women were perhaps publishing in publications that were having lower citation rankings across the world, but actually were being heavily read by the practitioner communities in their own disciplines. But because they weren't ranked as highly, their promotional prospects were actually being impeded because promotion boards weren't trained, weren't actually aware of how to look at the value of the work work that the different applicants were bringing. And in this instance, we're thinking about gender. So these two men stuck in my mind as people were trying to make changes at a structural level to impact on women. And the final thing that I think I want to bring in and then sort of let my colleagues here add their bits in is the issue of life-work balance. And consciously using the words life-work instead of work-life, I think is important because life is more important than work. So life-work balance, and actually in terms of my time as head of an establishment, I've been quite surprised at how 9 to 5 a work culture, presenteeism culture there is within higher education. It's almost as though the longer you work, people assume the more clever you are and the harder and the more effective you are. That is so not true. And so I'm now saying to people, can we look at different ways of working? And I think that's where technology can assist us. For right or wrong, many women do their work during the day. They juggle their home life, they go home, they feed their children, they be mother, and then they work again in the evening, and they do their emails and things. That's quite common. Now, maybe men do that too, but women as the primary carers do that all the time on a daily basis. So actually, some of those women, in order to keep the door open, the professional door open, quite happy to do that for a short period until their children grow up, but they do require to be able to work further into the day. So using things like Google Hangouts, Skype, shared drives, not having a presenteeism culture, I think this life-work balance, we've got to crack that, because if we don't crack that, then as we heard in the previous session, women will automatically have to pull themselves out of the framework, and that will cost them in terms of their career.
Thanks very much, Rowena. 2 points there that really struck me, I think 2 points that have actually been discussed a number of times over the last few days. Firstly, when you mentioned perhaps the beneficial aspect of quotas or aspirational targets, and I'd be interested to hear from the delegates in the room some responses to that when we open it up to the floor shortly. And also, when you talked about convincing men and focusing on the institutional structures within it rather than just increasing the numbers of women, one of the questions that I was asked that came out of one of the sessions yesterday by one of the delegates was, how do we convince men? What is it that we can do to help them understand? And the example that you gave there about using daughters as an example is quite an interesting one. Again, I'd be interested to hear from the floor some other comments on that. But first, Anuradha, you're approaching it from a different perspective, from more of the outside of academia, if you like. From where you sit, do you see or progress towards breaking these glass ceilings in the wider sector outside academia? And when you look into academia, what do you see specifically about it which makes it different?
Thanks, Danny, and thanks, Rowena. There were lots of points there to sort of comment on. I think in responding to your question, the first thing that strikes me is that this is one example of the grass being greener on the other side. It looks exactly the same way from where I sit. There will be exceptions to the rule. There will be some sectors, some companies, some states that look better in terms of statistics. But conversations across the board, across sectors, across geographies are very focused on figuring out why women don't progress enough up the careers, irrespective of where they work. So I think we are talking about a very universal challenge. I don't think this is specific to higher education in the manner that we're talking about it. If you just replace higher education with manufacturing, with IT, with research, the answer will be exactly the same. I think what is very encouraging is that this conversation seems to be taking center stage across the board. And that sort of lets me feel that somewhere the tipping point is approaching in terms of the conversation that is addressing what one needs to do to address the missing half of the population in the workforce. I think the first answer is that I think the reason why this is becoming center stage is I think there is a recognition that of course this is about fairness and justice, but it is actually about values to the organization. At least in the business world, there is a very clear recognition that there is a business case for more women on the workforce. There are conversations where you resent the use of the word diversity and inclusion because this is about half the population. This is not about small ethnic minorities. This is not about small populations, whether it is with a disability or with a victimization. This is half the world's population. So I think there is time to stop referring to it as a diversity and inclusion issue. This is actually about addressing that half of the talent that is just going untapped. In large parts of at least the world that I inhabit, that's become obvious, that what can we do to ensure that we have access to this talent pool, which is right now going waste. There are political leaders, Shinzo Abe has become famous with this word called Womenomics, where he's saying that there's 2% that you can add to your GDP growth by being able to access the talent that women represent that just falls off the workforce. And that brings me to one of the points that Roina made. I'm not going to go into the statistics because I think there's enough examples given about how few women there are, whether you look at boards, whether you look at the top 300 corporations of the world, whether you look at heads of state, there just are way too few to suggest that, they actually belong and represent 50% of the world's population. So right from there is underrepresentation across the board, irrespective of which sector you look at. I think the striking thing that has started to become evident to people is that if we look at enrollment ratios across the world, women in higher education, from an enrollment standpoint, have started to overtake the enrollment ratios for men. The growth rates for women are higher. India in 2013, women in higher education surpassed the number of men in higher education. But you look 5 years, 7 years, 10 years out of that, and the women seem to vanish. Where do these women go? Where are they? Why isn't the world being able to access this pool of competent, bright, educated women, even urban women? I'm not going into the rural informal sector. I'm talking about urban educated women. Where are these women going? And therefore the challenge is actually for society, it's for governments, and it's for organizations to ensure that this education translates into empowerment. And I'm making a larger social statement that I don't know whether India is yet at a stage where it can educate for the sake of education. A lot of the education that we undertake is education for the sake of empowerment, and that the investment, the time, the resources being put into educating women is actually not translating into empowerment. The reasons are universal. It is childcare and elder care that actually is still the primary responsibility of women, and when those choices become real, women drop out of the workforce. So what is going on that can actually address this issue, because the acceptance of these challenges is actually quite universal. I think one reason why men are coming into the conversation is because, at least in the younger generation, men also want to have the choice to be primary parents. Exactly like a woman wants to have the choice to be at work. I often say that for women in India, wanting a life where you have some work and some personal time is a very ordinary aspiration. That ordinary aspiration is an extraordinary challenge for most women, because it just becomes impossible. These crossroads that you hit when you have children, when you have aging parents or in-laws, you don't have trustworthy, dependable childcare, that it is not a choice that you stay home. It is a limited choice, because an unsafe environment for your kids versus dropping out of the workforce, of course you choose dropping out of the workforce. But is that a fair choice? Is that a complete and holistic choice? I think is the big question that we have to answer. And in recognition of that, what has started to happen is that at least corporations across the world, and also in India, have started to try and figure out what they can do to make it possible till such time that society changes or the social construct changes with equal sharing of responsibilities. We stop talking about working women and we start talking about working families. But till that point, what can we do to make it easier for women to participate in the workforce? So companies like TCS, for example, has actually launched a very wide and large program to attract and invite women who have taken a break from their careers back into the workforce. They offer flexi timings, they offer working from home, they offer part-time, all kinds of options, project-based, full-time, whatever you would like to do, but their commitment is to getting women who have taken a break from their careers back into the workforce. I think it's called Second Life or Next Life or some such thing, but it's a program focused on bringing those women back. Mentoring, of course it exists, but I think it is woefully inadequate because women don't have role models. You know, you have the Margaret Thatchers and the Indira Gandhis who actually put a lot of young women off wanting to be in leadership positions. And then you have your peer groups who have dropped out just to be good mothers and be at home. And I think there is a recognition as you grow older that it needn't have been an either or. The people who can help you when you are facing those choices, when you need support for someone to tell you it's okay, that mentoring and skilling is actually very, very important. And the third thing is policy and infrastructure related. What are companies doing? What are governments doing? Whether it's around maternity leave, whether it's around paternity leave, whether it's around creches, whether it's around flexible timings, all of those things which are focused on policy and infrastructure, I think companies are making a beginning and starting to focus on wanting more women in the workforce and therefore making it possible for them to engage. The question really is, are these programs working and are they enough? And the short answer is yes, they are beginning to work. They are clearly not enough. So it's not about whether we should do this or we should do that. The answer is we need to do this and we need to do that. And whether this is about the quality and quantity of girls in primary education versus the quantity and quality of women on boards, there needs to be efforts underway in society, in government, and in corporate India to actually just have more and better across the continuum. So I just want to end with one thought, that as I look around me and I look at women very competent, very qualified, dropping off the workforce, I just think that this conference is about women in higher education. There is also an input that higher education could make to women's education in terms of equipping them not just with a degree, but with the kind of thinking you need to be able to make your choices in a far more informed manner. I think our programs in higher education and the education sector in general prepare women for employment, but they don't prepare them enough to navigate the challenges and the choices that they make as they have to stay in the workforce. So somewhere it's about preparing women to join the workforce and then be able to stay in the workforce. And societal and governmental responses to working towards an environment where it isn't about women fitting in to a male construct, where it just becomes an equal construct where men can be primary parents and women can have fulfilling and full-time continuous careers. I think that's really what we have to work towards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anuradha, for that very detailed response, covering a wide number of issues. I thought it was interesting that you picked up on empowerment, and that links back to Dr. Louise Morley's point in the last parallel session in here about women becoming consumers of education rather than creators of knowledge, and how that links to needing to push the empowerment agenda. And you also stressed the importance of mentors within the education system. And Professor Pulubuhu, I think you have the potential to motivate and inspire because you've broken through those glass ceilings to get to the position that you are now. Perhaps you could tell us, from your perspective in Indonesia at Universitas Hasanuddin, what kind of glass ceilings, what kind of challenges did you have on the way up? And the fact that you've reached the position, is this a positive sign that there is a positive trend in Indonesia to address these issues, or are there still a great number of challenges remaining?
Thank you, Danny. And thank you, Dr. Royana and Ms. Anuradha for sharing your ideas. Well, you're asking the very hard question for me because I'm moving my ideas, remembering my experience how to reach this top position in my university. It's a very, very tough process and very tough election. Even after I won the election, my another competitors still, you know, bring his looseman to the court and protect the winning process. So in my experience to be reach the top position in higher education institute is a very extremely different to other sectors like business or industry, because we need, yes, I need competence, it's very important, but it's not really competent. Beyond that, it's like full required very, very high competence that we have to be capable. Yes, we have to have a good knowledge, and the academician have to convince that we can prove to lead them. You know, all the academicians are the knowledgeable person. It's very hard to lead them. And then we have to get the skill, have to fostering the skill, like have to capacity to negotiate, to persuade the people, the academician, to elect us, and then to also influence the government, because as my university, state university, the involvement of the local government and national government to agree one person to be running in the election to be the rector or president of university have to be supported by them, by the government, and also many other like top leaders in our surrounding community. And also another aspect that very important, we have to pose a very good attitude, like as you said, have to be confident, have to be a good mental, a strong mental, and then have to positive thinking, and have to pose a very strong character. That's I don't believe that all educated women or knowledge women will post this aspect. For instance, my cases, when after 58th anniversary in my university, this is the first time there is a lady professor, female woman, run for the election. When I asked to my senior female professor, my college, why didn't you run before? No, I believe no one agree to be the big university to be led by the female woman professor, and just wasting time to run the election. That's most of the reason. That's very tough. When, in my experience, when I decide to run the election, you know, the against for my idea is come not only from the academician, from the university community, but from outside. So even the newspaper, local newspaper, raised also the issue why this woman, this professor would like to run the election. Could she able to lead this big university? How she faced the problem when the big student, like in my university, 33,000 students, how she can manage when the student going to demonstrate, to protest, how can she manage when the professors protest. We have 300 senators who elect. How can she deal with this very senior professor and very intelligent one? So even the newspaper, the discussion is raising. So if one lady, one woman have to be achieve that position in higher education, have to pose a very strong attitude for that. That's not easy. Because why? It has to be created since the beginning. Coming from your family background, that you have a very good family that give you equal right, not different thing, giving the different treatment either to the doctor and the son. And then you have also have a good background in your own family, like having a very understanding husband, understanding children, that they have to share the mother, the wife, his wife to community, to manage another things, another matter outside of the family. What I'm saying is the competence for other sectors like business or industry is how the woman can prove bringing. Oh, sorry. Well, in another sector, the competence for women, yes, capacity, knowledge, and skill, and so on. But she just needed to prove that she can bring the profit or the benefit directly to the company or the either office that she worked for. That's kindly of a direct benefit. It's, yeah, but not to be the leaders in the higher education, in the university, it's not as that. We have to bring in the quality achievement of the university, because the university produce the leaders for the next, for the future, for the nation, for the world. So seemingly that people, government, expecting a lot from the leader, from the rector, from the president, since the university not only deal with the core business of the university to educate the people only or to doing the research only, but how the university can create the best alumni to be the leader in the future. This is like, for females, it's like overburdened expectation. That was why that I am thinking that one factor that have to be posing for break the glass ceiling in the leadership in higher education has how to encourage more women to believe that, or to be confident they can do it. And yet, indeed, the role model is very important. Much more role model, it will be inspiring the woman to be running in the very task process. So another that I can sharing is that I bring from another parallel discussion previous that is it's really related with the social construction as well. As you said, Dr. Rowena said, yes, there is gender biases in higher education as well as happening in other area in the community. Even though we are a very intelligent community, knowledgeable community, but we still, our mindset, our perception is challenging by the bias. For instance, why few female students choosing the engineering, math, science, and so on, instead of this, because they are still contrasting by the idea related from their family that discipline, stereotyping belong to the male. Because if you go to that discipline, then you have to work after overseas on the outside of home. You will be surrounding by the high challenge, by the male domination, that and equipment, hard equipment, and so on. So what I think this for now, I'm what my experience and my idea. So generally speaking, I'm saying that it's not easy to break the glass ceiling in the higher education leadership. It has to be supported not by the competency of a lot of the female, but also the support by the policy and the support by the facility, and then the support by the some kind like how to publish, socializing the idea through the media, so makes a lot encouraging much more women to deal with the very hard process. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Professor Bulabuhu. It was interesting there when you talked about women having to prove their competency, and it reminded me of Sheryl Sandberg, who said that often men are promoted based on potential, whereas women are only promoted based on their achievements, that they already have to prove the competency or prove the benefit before they are offered these opportunities for advancement. We've had a large number of perspectives here, not only that, but a large number of concrete suggestions and of positive action. And we can recognize that some higher education institutions do have a larger number of women in leadership roles. So I want to open it up to the floor to get some of your experience and your perspectives. Why do some higher education institutions have more women in leadership roles? What are they doing right? And from your perspective, what do you see in the countries in which you work in? We've got about 15 minutes for questions and points. I'll take two to start off with. We have one here and one over there.
My question to Anuradha. Yes, the higher education sector, like many others, perhaps women are like not so high in the leadership positions. But I just wanted to ask you, one of the things as a layperson I observe is that in the Indian banking sector, women are in really, leadership roles. Even a State Bank of India, which is like a government-led, I mean, you have Nandini Bhattacharya or whatever, and of course also in the private bank. So, I mean, is there something about some sectors of, entrepreneurship or banking or thing where, this glass ceiling has been broken? And can we look at those, and, think about others?
The needs of women, to address their capacity, must be done. It is very obvious. However, the question is how we can make that really happen. That's the question. And in my point of view, the way how to make that happen cannot be one single way. It is a very very depend on the local condition, local social condition and local culture. For instance, I'm from Indonesia. Also, the lady is also, we are the only 3 rectors in Indonesian state university. But both of us having different background of culture. And in his election for the rector seems to be very tough. In contrast, in our situation, I was elected by the Board of Trustees, and as I mentioned before, only 2 female in the board among 21 members, and they can decide that the lady is the rector. So perhaps in different culture, the battle will be different as well. So I would suggest that it cannot be as one single solution. And finally, I would like to know how is your views if more women goes to higher education, seems to be more women is not willing to have the children. So like in Singapore and Japan, they have minimum demographic profile. I mean the number of productive population is declining gradually. So how we can make a balance between our spirit to have more and more women leaders, more and more women workers, by regarding our future nation when less and less child born in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anuradha, do you want to take the first question? What can we learn from the Indian banking sector?
So I think the banking sector in India is a bit like the token woman or the token black person on boards or in companies that sort of proves the point that it can happen, but obviously I think it is one of those sectors that stands out. This morning before coming here, as I was looking at the banking case study, there was a very interesting report that I saw on the contrast within the banking sector between the public sector and the quasi-government promoted sector, quasi-government promoted banks versus private sector banks and foreign banks. And the contrast even there is quite stark. I think if you talk to the ICICIs and the HDFCs and the Axis banks that have sort of shown the change, it is because where government set procedures can actually help the woman along, those banks have actually used, the Indian banking sector actually used that process very, very effectively. So if you talk to a Chanda Kochar or you talk to a Shikha Sharma, they will tell you how in their early days taking 5 years out or 2 years out didn't actually come in the way of the promotion and coming back into the workforce. So I think the government system, which otherwise is responsible for lethargy and lack of performance, I think in the banking sector is the one place where it has done wonders for women to be able to stay the course. That's correct.
Thank you. Rowena, would you like to respond to the question from over here? I think one of the points that came from that question was the difficulty of being elected when on the board of 21, only 2 were male. And I think this links to something you mentioned in your opening statement about the importance of quotas or of aspirational targets.
I think the one thing I do want to agree with the colleague who spoke here was the fact that there is no one approach. And I think that is absolutely the case. And in fact, if you think about my own university, we do have an awareness of gender issues. We do think about this. We're still not getting the traction that's required to get more women into leadership. But one of the things that I think that has pushed it along for us, and it's something that has been mentioned over the last 2 days, is about somebody mentioned Athena Swan earlier, yesterday, I think. But the one that we went for was Gender Equality Charter Mark. Whatever it is you're going for is basically a toolkit that actually gets you to actually look at how well you're doing. Now, getting the Charter Mark or the Athena Swan Award is not the issue. The point is taking part in it gets the conversations going within the workplace. And surveys that are done with men and women staff, students, are showing actually there are percentage gaps of perception where women are consistently saying things are not as good and men are saying, actually, I think it's all right. So actually that opens up conversations, doesn't it? So whether you get the Charter Mark at the end or the award, it becomes the icing on the cake. In terms of boards and quotas and things, I do sincerely believe that if you start disrupting what is the norm and you create change, change will start occurring. Now, in your instance, you talked about 2 women on your board and you were still getting in as the rector. And I think that's great, and that shows how fabulous an individual you are and also how enlightened your board happens to be. However, I do think that change creates change. If things are static and a comfortableness sets in, and you're just talking to your friends, really, at the end of the day, then it won't occur. Now, some of that change will not necessarily be good. So things like, doesn't mean that if you get women to the very top, that things will naturally occur in terms of gender equity. Margaret Thatcher did absolutely nothing for women and women's rights in the UK. In fact, took it backwards by many decades. So actually, you've got to get the right woman. And actually, the right man at the top with a gendered perspective will also do the same. So I think it's about getting the right people with that right discipline and discourse and political perspective on it, and analysis and theories. Before I kind of lose the place of the mic, I did actually want to read out something which I thought was rather interesting. And it was in the Australian newspaper. And it said, the title was, "Women are celebrated for everything as long as it's not her talent." And it was regarding Colleen McCulloch. Colleen McCulloch was an author that died very recently. And they contrasted the obituary. A woman writer said, look at how it works. Bryce Courtney was also an author. He died just earlier. And this is how the Australian newspaper reported Bryce Courtney's death. So media narrative discourse, very important, changing the language. Bryce Courtney was one of Australia's greatest storytellers, touching the hearts of millions of people around the world with his 21 best-selling books, including The Power of One. So you know immediately, don't you? He's a prolific author, he's very well read, and he's clearly liked by many. Now, turn to the obituary section of Colleen McCulloch. Colleen McCulloch, Australia's best-selling author, was a charmer, plain of feature, and certainly overweight. She was nevertheless a woman of wit and warmth. In one interview, she said, "I've never been into clothes or figure, and the interesting thing is, I never had any trouble attracting men." That was her obituary. So actually, how we position, how we speak about issues, and I think you mentioned that in particular, the narrative and the media and the discourse is seriously important. So I didn't want to lose that before I gave the mic over.
Thanks very much, Rowena. Professor Kulabuhu, some last reflections from you before we break for lunch. Perhaps responding to some of the points that have been raised. Does change beget change?
Yes, we get change, but we need to more changing, especially to break the glass ceiling in the leadership in the higher education. The problem is usually we only perceive that the gender bias existing only in the less educated woman, in the poor woman, and poor family, and so on. We seemingly doubt to admit that gender bias is still exists also in academia world. So if this still happening, so how we can make equal gender in the world in general, if in the intelligent community, knowledgeable community still facing this issue? Okay, so what we need is we have to work hard you know, to break the gender bias in the academia world by persuading, encouraging, and publishing, and looking much more role model to be inspiring the females professor and lecturers. And of course, as my friends, Professor Dwi Korita said, we facing also the problem of we have, even though we are already responsible with the big matter of the universities task, but we have to also responsible to take care of family, to deal with the special activity, maternity, to nurse the children, and so on. In this case, why female professor, they postpone to get married, and sometimes they also postpone to having children earlier, and then sometimes they prefer to have less children than. This for me is related that we thinking too much how to responsible to our children, our domestic tasks. So this meaning that if we have to deal to, you know, to break the glass ceiling in the higher education, that have to be also supported by the policy, the facility, by the government. I'm not saying I'm agree the quota, the special right giving quota is like we neglected the competitive based process. But giving facility, giving the special right for women to responsible the special tasks that only in the woman, like reproductive, and so on, it's very important. It's very important. It's not much university provide the place for women that have after giving the birth and can bring their children to nurse them. Not much university, and not much university, I believe, having a special place to take care their children, the young children. Not much. I think that's also needed to be provided by the government. I think facility and special support services have to be provided also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for before lunch, but I'm sure if you join the panelists during lunch, they'd be delighted to answer your questions. And I'm sure that everyone would like to join me in thanking Anuradha Das Matter, Dr. Rowena Arshad, and Professor Dwia Aristina Pulubuhu.
Thank you very much. As Danny said, it is lunchtime now. We will start our open session at 13:45. For those of you who've been to our policy dialogues before, you'll realise that we're not just about the talk. We are also about coming out with actionable outcomes. This is where we can take away the actual things which we believe as a group we need to be doing. And then that conversation can be had with the senior policymakers, etc., about these are the actions which are going to change the system. So our open session will be focusing on specific themes that we've heard emerging, and they'll be looking very much at your contribution to what interventions can we make and can we suggest to policymakers to be able to change the status quo. So that'll be 13:45. We'll recommence with that session. Thank you very much.